Hi everybody, this is Miss Klemme and welcome to the first of 3 videos on the respiratory system. And in fact, that's what we're looking at right here. This is a dissection of your respiratory system, and all that's left are the many tiny little tubes. And it all starts out with one large tube, the trachea, and then it branches into smaller and smaller tubes. And it just shows you such great big surface area is covered in both of your lungs. And so air just kind of follows all of those tubes and goes all these different ways until it ends up in a little tiny balloon at the end of all of these little branches. And that's where the most important part of the respiratory system actually happens, the gas exchange process. So we'll take you there eventually, but first we're going to look at the upper respiratory system and the big picture of things. So if you remember, this is going to bring back several different videos that you've watched in the past. It's going to bring back your circulatory system as well as metabolism to give you the big picture. So if you remember, the right side of the heart pumps oxygen-poor blood, or CO2 rich blood, to the lungs. And the lungs, all those little tiny tubes exchange gases, so what we're left with is oxygen rich blood going to the left side of your heart. And the left side of your heart pumping into all the different body cells, and that's where the oxygen gets dropped off. It gets dropped off at those body cells and goes straight to their mitochondria, where their mitochondria use it in the citric acid cycle to make ATP. And what's left? Lots of CO2, which goes back to the heart, to the right side of the heart, and we start over. And so remember, when we're just studying the lungs, that's not the whole picture. The whole picture is we need to make ATP, and the lungs help us to do this by getting rid of all that excess CO2 when we make ATP to power our bodies. So keep the big picture in mind for all of this. But what we're really going to focus on this particular video is the upper respiratory system. Everything from about your voice box up. Then the next video in this series will be the lower respiratory system, so your trachea and down into your lungs. And finally, we'll take a look at the breathing mechanisms that involve your diaphragm and how you actually can inhale and exhale. So let's just begin with some basic anatomy by looking at the first place that air enters, and that's the nose. And so up here you can see these basic structures that you should know. The first are the nares, and that's just the nostrils. You have the right and the left. And the right and the left is divided by a septum, right down the middle, just like in the heart. And there are some sinuses. On this particular picture, there are 3 different pairs of sinuses. And sinuses do a lot of different things, but one of which is they actually help to produce some sounds and resonate sounds so that we don't sound nasally necessarily. And they also help to produce some mucus for our nasal cavity. Let's see, the last structure of the conchi. Here's 2 subdivisions kind of the conchi. They're just these weird shaped little bones in your nose, and they create turbulence for the incoming air so that the cells that line your nasal cavity can try and capture as much debris and germs as possible before that air gets any further into your body. So overall, the function of the nose is to kind of warm and clean the air, especially with those conchi and the mucus in your nose. It moistens air with the mucus, but don't forget it also serves as a sense of smell. So we have our olfactory receptors in there as well. Moving a little bit lower to the throat, also known as the pharynx. The pharynx is just right below our nasal cavity, and the eustachian tubes actually drain into those. If you remember, eustachian tubes are the tubes that help to equilibrate pressure on the other side of the tympanic membrane, and they'll drain into the pharynx. And then we have 2 types of lymphatic tissues in the pharynx, the tonsils and the adenoids, which just help as an immune defense system by producing some white blood cells. Overall function for the pharynx is that not only does air pass through there, but foods and liquids do as well. Moving a little bit lower, as you can see in the black circle, is the larynx. And the larynx has 2 members that are important. First is the epiglottis. And remember, the epiglottis is that one little structure here that closes when we swallow any food or beverages, so we don't get those going into our lungs. And there's also some vocal cords in the larynx. There's like they look like from a side view, but here's what we look like from the top view. We have two vocal cords, and the faster they vibrate as air passes over them, the higher the pitch. So that's the upper respiratory system. For the larynx, the only real function is the passageway for air and producing voice, or producing our voices. But I want to keep in mind something. From the nose to the pharynx and the larynx, everything is lined with this thick layer of mucus, not only to moisten and warm the air, but to also trap as much debris as possible. And there's another structure in that respiratory lining called cilia. You can see them in this picture. They're tiny, tiny little hairs, and those really help to sweep those germs and debris up over the pharynx, or up over the epiglottis area, and into our esophagus, where they're swallowed, and hydrochloric acid destroys them for good. And so that's a look at the upper respiratory system. Thanks for listening.